In March 1896, a Thames bargeman had just pulled something from the water that would make him wish he'd never looked. The brown paper package was heavier than it should be, wetter, and when he tore it open, a tiny foot emerged from the sodden wrapping. Inside was the body of a baby girl, perhaps 6 months old. Around her neck, pulled so tight it had disappeared into her flesh, was a length of white dressmaking tape. The bargeman's name was Charles Humphreys, and he'd spent 30 years working the Thames. He'd seen bodies before, suicides, accidents, murder victims. But this was different. This was a baby, carefully wrapped, deliberately weighted, thrown into the river like refuse. The cold water had preserved the tiny corpse, but couldn't hide the horror of what had been done. The white tape had cut so deeply into the infant's neck that it was barely visible, embedded in the swollen flesh. Humphreys, a father of 6 himself, felt his hands shake as he wrapped the package back up and rowed immediately to shore to alert the authorities. Within days, police would find more packages, more babies, all with the same white tape, all leading back to one woman, a respectable-looking middle-aged lady who advertised herself as a loving foster mother. Her name was Amelia Dyer, and she had been murdering babies for money for nearly 30 years. We're about to uncover her story. But first, if you enjoy these journeys into Victorian crime's darkest corners, please don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. It really helps us bring more of these horrifying histories to light. Our first glimpse of her comes from the village of Pyle Marsh, just east of Bristol. In 1837, Amelia Elizabeth Hobley was born, the youngest of 5 children to Samuel Hobley, a master shoemaker, and his wife Sarah. This was a respectable working-class family, not wealthy, but comfortable. Samuel's trade provided steady income, and young Amelia received more education than many girls of her class. She could read and write fluently, skills that would later prove devastatingly useful. But death was already circling. As Amelia grew up, 2 of her younger siblings died, leaving her as the youngest of what had been 7 children. Infant mortality was tragically common. 1 in 4 children died before their 5th birthday. But for young Amelia, these deaths may have planted something dark. A casual familiarity with dead babies, an understanding that infant death could go unquestioned. Some historians have speculated that watching her mother's grief, and then the swift burial, and apparent acceptance of these deaths as God's will, may have taught young Amelia a terrible lesson that babies could die without consequence, without investigation, without anyone really caring beyond the initial tears. Amelia trained as a nurse, and learned midwifery, respectable professions for a woman of her era. She was intelligent and ambitious. During her training, she learned how fragile infant life was, how easily a baby could slip away, how many deaths could be attributed to natural causes. She also learned something sinister, how to keep a baby quiet with laudanum, how to recognize starvation, and crucially, how to make death look unremarkable. The medical knowledge she gained was extensive. She understood exactly how much opium could be administered without leaving obvious traces. She knew which signs of suffocation could be explained away as natural respiratory failure. She learned that in Victorian England, where 1 in 4 babies died anyway, another dead infant rarely prompted serious inquiry. In 1861, at age 24, she married George Thomas, a man 33 years her senior, a widower of 57. They had a daughter together. Then in 1869, George died. Amelia was 32, suddenly a widow with a child to support and no income. 3 years later, she married William Dyer. They had children together, but this marriage was troubled, and Amelia eventually left him. She was now alone with multiple mouths to feed. That's when she discovered baby farming. To understand what happens next, you need to understand the nightmare facing unmarried mothers in Victorian England. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 made it so fathers of illegitimate children were not obligated by law to support their children financially, leaving many women without options. Picture this: you're a young woman earning 10 shillings a week, you become pregnant. Your employer dismisses you immediately. Your family disowns you. The father walks away, no consequences, no responsibility. You give birth with no job, no home, no money. You can't feed yourself, let alone a child. The workhouse awaits, a place of deliberate misery designed to punish the poor, or prostitution. or starvation, or death. Into this hell stepped the baby farmers. Baby farmers advertised in newspapers to care for infants for a weekly fee, usually 5 shillings, or offered full adoption for a one-off payment. The ads appeared in miscellaneous sections, promising respectable homes, loving care, nice country homes. For desperate mothers, these seemed like lifelines. Amelia began placing her own advertisements in multiple newspapers: Bristol, Reading, Oxford, Cheltenham. She used various aliases: Mrs. Harding, Mrs. Thomas, Mrs. Sullivan. Her letters were masterpieces of manipulation. In one surviving letter, she wrote, "I should be glad to have a dear baby girl, one I could bring up and call my own. We are plain, homely people, in fairly good circumstances." The letters continued with warm details about her comfortable home, her kind husband, the nursery prepared with toys. Who could resist such apparent kindness? At first, Dyer cared for children legitimately, in addition to having 2 of her own. She worked as an intermediary, placing babies with other caregivers, but babies were dying through neglect, starvation, or opium overdoses. Amelia discovered something crucial: dead babies were more profitable than living ones. A weekly payment of 5 shillings required ongoing care and feeding, but a one-off payment of £10 or more required no ongoing expense if the baby died quickly. By 1879, 4 nurse children in her care died within 2 weeks. 4 babies, 14 days. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Amelia was convicted of neglect and sentenced to 6 months hard labor. Prison should have ended her career. It didn't. When she emerged in 1879, she made one crucial change. She no longer notified doctors to remove corpses. From 1880 onward, Amelia Dyer disposed of the bodies herself, making her a prolific serial killer. No more awkward questions, no more inquests, just murder, concealment, and profit. Her method was brutally efficient and deeply disturbing. Within hours of acquiring a new infant, she would wrap white dressmaking tape around its neck. Death was not instantaneous. According to her own confession, Dyer stated that she liked to watch them with the tape around their neck as they gasped for air. She enjoyed watching babies die. This wasn't mercy killing or even cold murder for profit. This was sadism. She took pleasure in their suffering, watching as tiny infants struggled for breath, their faces turning blue, their bodies convulsing, and she felt satisfaction. The white tape became her signature, narrow enough not to leave obvious marks, strong enough to kill efficiently, cheap enough to buy anywhere without suspicion. After the babies died, death by strangulation could take several agonizing minutes. She wrapped their tiny bodies in cloth, weighted them with bricks, and buried them, or threw them into the Thames during nighttime walks. Birth mothers would send letters asking about their children's well-being. By the time Dyer received them, the children were long dead. But Amelia would write back with false reassurances: "Little Mary is thriving wonderfully. She has the most beautiful smile. She loves the garden and the fresh country air." Sometimes she'd ask for more money. "Could you send another £1 for winter clothing?" The desperate mothers, working brutal hours to scrape together these payments, would send what they could, never knowing they were funding more murders. Victorian Britain was rife with baby farmers, who would quietly do away with their charges. Scarcely a day passed without another report of an infant corpse found abandoned beneath a railway carriage, under an archway, in a sewer grating, or dumped in a city suburb. Dead babies were so common they barely merited newspaper coverage. Police were overwhelmed. Coroners concluded death by natural causes. Nobody connected the dots. Nobody realized one woman moving methodically from town to town was responsible for an industrial-scale murder operation. For nearly 3 decades, Amelia operated with near-total impunity. She was extraordinarily careful. She moved frequently, never staying long enough for patterns to emerge. She used multiple aliases and gave false addresses for correspondence. She kept meticulous financial records of payments, but no records of the children, no names, no dates, nothing to connect her to specific babies. She cultivated respectability, well-dressed, well-spoken, with a nurse's authoritative manner, and she kept killing, month after month, year after year, decade after decade. Every time she opened a newspaper and saw desperate advertisements from unmarried mothers, she saw opportunity. Every time she wrote one of her warm motherly letters, she was luring another victim. Every time she accepted payment and received a baby, she was minutes away from murder. Then, in January 1896, she made mistakes that would finally end her career. Evelina Marmon, a popular 25-year-old barmaid, gave birth to an illegitimate daughter, Doris, in a boarding house in Cheltenham. Evelina was well-liked, hard-working, and had been saving money. The pregnancy was devastating. The father had disappeared, but she was determined Doris would have a good life. She placed an advertisement, wanted, respectable woman to take a young child. Right next to it was another married couple, with no family, would adopt a healthy child. Nice country home. Terms £10. Evelina responded. The woman who replied called herself Mrs. Harding. Her letters were warm, sincere. She wrote movingly about longing for a baby girl to raise as her own. Evelina wanted to pay weekly to stay in contact, but Mrs. Harding insisted on the £10 one-off payment. Eventually, Mrs. Harding's warmth won out over Evelina's hesitation. They arranged to meet at Cheltenham Station. On March 30th, 1896, Evelina arrived carrying 3-month-old Doris and a carpet bag of baby clothes she'd sewn herself. Mrs. Harding, really Amelia Dyer, now 59, appeared exactly as described. Respectable, motherly, with a nurse's confident bearing. She exclaimed over baby Doris, cooing about her beautiful eyes. Evelina handed over £10, more than 2 months' wages, and watched Mrs. Harding walk away carrying her daughter. She believed she had secured Doris's future. She had just paid someone to murder her baby. Within hours, Amelia strangled baby Doris with white tape. On April 2nd, 1896, she placed 2 bodies, including Doris, in a carpet bag weighted with bricks and tossed it into the Thames at Caversham Lock, near Reading. But Amelia had become careless. After 30 years of successful murders, she'd grown overconfident. Days earlier, another package had been found. Baby Helena Fry, also strangled with white tape. When bargeman Charles Humphreys pulled it from the water, he notified police immediately. Reading Borough Police Chief Constable George Chewsley set his detective force to work. Detective Constable Anderson, making microscopic analysis of the wrapping paper, discovered and deciphered a faintly written name and address. Anderson was methodical, patient, thorough. He spent hours examining waterlogged brown paper under a magnifying glass. Most of the writing had been obliterated by Thames water, but there, almost invisible, were crucial letters. Slowly, painstakingly, he pieced together, Mrs. Thomas, Mayo Road, Reading. Police began surveillance immediately. They dredged the Thames. More packages emerged. 6 infant bodies total, all wrapped similarly, all strangled with the same white tape. On April 3, 1896, police raided 76 Mayo Road. Though no human remains were found, the stench of decay was overwhelming. Evidence was discovered: white edging tape, rolls of it, telegrams arranging adoptions, receipts from advertisements, and letters from mothers requesting information on their children. One letter read, "Dear Mrs. Harding, I have managed to save another 5 shillings for her winter coat. Please send word." The baby had been dead for 3 weeks. The next day, Amelia Dyer was arrested. The case exploded across newspapers. Victorian England had been hardened by Jack the Ripper, but this was different. This was babies, hundreds of them. A respectable-looking woman, operating in plain sight for 3 decades. When asked about the white tape, Dyer made a chilling statement. "That was how you could tell it was one of mine. One of mine." Like products she'd manufactured, she was proud of her signature. On May 21, 1896, Amelia Dyer stood trial at the Old Bailey for the murder of Doris Marmon. She pleaded guilty, but declared herself insane. She rocked back and forth, moaned, stared blankly. She'd used mental illness claims before, but the prosecution argued persuasively that her behavior was devious play acting, showing her careful planning, multiple aliases, false addresses, meticulous financial records. Her madness was selective, perfectly sane, when placing ads, writing letters, collecting payments. Evelina Marmon testified, sobbing as she described handing baby Doris to the woman she'd believed would be a loving mother. The jury took less than 5 minutes to reach a guilty verdict. Amelia Elizabeth Dyer was sentenced to death. She filled 5 notebooks with her last and true confession, describing the pleasure she took in watching babies die. She calculated, perhaps over 300, maybe 400. I lost count after the first 100. On Wednesday, June 10, 1896, just before 9 a.m., Amelia Elizabeth Dyer was hanged at Newgate Prison in London. A crowd gathered outside, Many were mothers who had given babies to women, matching Amelia's description, and never heard from them again. On the scaffold, when asked if she had any last words, she responded simply, "No, I have nothing to say, no apology, no regret, nothing." At 58, she was the oldest woman hanged in Great Britain between 1844 and 1955. But age wasn't what made her case significant, it was the scale. She was tried for one murder, but likely killed between 200 and 400 children. For 30 years, she had run an industrial murder operation. The horror didn't end with her execution. In 1902, 6 years later, a man preparing his garden in one of Amelia's former residences dug up skeletal remains. 5 infants, each strangled with white tape, wrapped in material, sprinkled with lime, and buried. Even from beyond the grave, her victims kept emerging. The case sparked massive change. Acts of Parliament were passed, including the Infant Life Protection Act of 1897 and the Children's Act of 1908, requiring local authorities be notified within 48 hours of any change of custody or death of a child under 7. But legislation couldn't bring back the dead. It couldn't undo the anguish of mothers like Evelina Marmon, haunted forever by handing baby Doris to a smiling stranger. Amelia Dyer was a psychopath, someone completely lacking empathy or conscience. Her pleasure in watching babies die suggests sadism beyond greed, but she wasn't insane. She ran a successful criminal enterprise for 3 decades through strategic planning and clever use of aliases. Perhaps most disturbing is how Victorian society created the perfect environment for her crimes. The brutal stigma against unmarried mothers, the law absolving fathers of responsibility, the complete absence of social support, the lack of regulation in childcare, the casual acceptance of infant mortality. All these factors created a system where desperate mothers were forced to trust strangers with their babies because society offered no alternative. And Amelia Dyer exploited that desperation with ruthless, calculated efficiency for 30 years. 400 babies, perhaps more, all unwanted by a society that valued reputation over life, propriety over compassion. They were born into shame, handed over in desperation, murdered for profit. Their bodies were thrown into rivers, buried in gardens, discarded like rubbish. And for 3 decades, nobody cared enough to investigate. Nobody cared enough to ask why so many babies were dying. Nobody cared enough to stop her. We started with a shoemaker's daughter in a respectable family. We found a widow who needed money, and we watched as she transformed into possibly the most prolific serial killer in British history, a woman who murdered helpless infants by the hundred and felt nothing but satisfaction. Where did the greater evil lie? In the hands of one monstrous woman who strangled babies for profit and took pleasure in their deaths? Or in the Victorian society that deliberately created a system where desperate mothers had no choice, where 400 dead babies could float in the Thames before anyone investigated, where illegitimate children's lives were so worthless their deaths barely merited notice? Amelia Dyer was a monster, without question, but she was a monster that Victorian society built, enabled, and allowed to operate for 30 years. The white tape around those babies' necks was her signature, but the blood on those tiny bodies belongs to an entire society that looked away.